Order. Statement, the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
Mr. Speaker, it's taking time, but the British economy is healing. After the biggest financial crash of our lifetimes, people know that we face deep-seated problems at home and abroad. At home, we live with the decade of debt and the failure to equip Britain to compete in the modern world. And we face a multitude of problems from abroad. The US fiscal cliff, the slowing growth in China, above all the Eurozone now in recession. People know that there are no quick fixes to these problems, but they want to know that we are making progress. And the message from today's autumn statement is that we are making progress. It is a hard road, but we're getting there. And Britain is on the right track.
Ask the Chancellor to resume his seat. Now, look, let's be clear about this. Each side should be heard with courtesy. The House knows well enough by now that I will afford a very full opportunity for questioning of the Chancellor. But the more interruption, the greater the noise, the longer the session will take, and that cannot be right. So I appeal to members, please, to give the Chancellor a courteous hearing, as indeed, if it becomes necessary, I will appeal to government backbenchers to afford a fair hearing to the Shadow Chancellor. That's how it should be. The Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, Britain is on the right track, and turning back now would be a disaster. We have much more to do. The deficit has fallen by a quarter in just 2 years. And today's figures show it is forecast to continue to fall. Exports of goods to the major emerging economies, which were pitifully low, have doubled since 2009. And since this coalition government came to office, 1.2 million new jobs have been created in the private sector. In a world economy where bond investors are fleeing countries they regard as risky, investment is flowing into UK gilts instead of flying from them. And we have to keep it that way. 2 years ago, Britain was in the danger zone. Now we are seen as one of the safe havens, able to borrow money at lower interest rates than at any time in our history. And today's forecast shows a £33 billion saving on the debt interest payments it was predicted we would have to pay 2 years ago. That is as much as the entire defence budget, which is why in this autumn statement we show that this coalition government is confronting the country's problems instead of ducking them. Today, we reaffirm our commitment to reducing the deficit, setting out the details of our spending plans for 2015-16 and rolling forward an outline framework into 2017-18. We show our determination to do this fairly, with further savings from bureaucracy, from the benefits bill and from the better off. We go on equipping Britain to succeed in the global race by switching from current spending to capital investment in science, roads and education. We offer new support for business and enterprise so they can create the jobs we need. And in everything we do, we will show today we are on the side of those who want to work hard and get on. Mr. Speaker, the Office for Budget Responsibility has today produced its latest economic forecast, and it is a measure of the constitutional achievement that it is taken for granted that our country's forecast is now produced independently of the Treasury, free from the political interference of the past. I want to thank Robert Choate, his fellow members of the Budget Responsibility Committee, Steve Nicol and Graham Parker, and all their staff at the OBR for their rigorous approach. One of the advantages of the creation of the OBR is that not only do we get independent forecasts, we also get an independent explanation of why the forecasts are as they are. If, for example, lower growth was the result of government's fiscal policy, they would say so, but they do not. They say the economy has performed less strongly than expected. They forecast growth this year of minus 0.1%. But in their view, and these are their words, the weaker than expected growth can be more than accounted for by over-optimism regarding net trade, because the OBR had previously assumed that the Eurozone would begin to recover in the second half of this year. Instead, of course, it has continued to contract, and that has hit our exports to these markets and the net trade numbers. The Eurozone crisis has also, the OBR say, spilled over into tighter credit conditions and elevated UK bank funding costs, and in the OBR's words, these problems will constrain growth for several years to come. There are domestic problems too that they refer to. In the report today, the contraction in 2008-2009 is now assessed to be deeper than previously thought, with GDP shrinking by a staggering 6.3%, the largest shock to our economy since the Second World War. In the OBR's view, the aftermath of this shock continues to weigh on the productivity of the UK economy, with credit rationing and impaired financial markets potentially impeding the expansion of successful firms. They say that GDP growth is now expected to be lower in every year of the forecast period as credit conditions take longer to normalise and global growth remains, in their words, weaker than previously expected. As a result, the OBR forecasts that the economy will grow by 1.2% next year, then 2% in 2014, 2.3% in 2015, 2.7% in 2016, and 2.8% in 2017. So the economy is recovering, and it's recovering more quickly than many of our neighbours. The IMF estimates that the UK next year will grow more strongly than either France or Germany. And our credible fiscal policy allows for supportive monetary policy, and with the Bank of England we are directly addressing the problems of tight credit through the £70 billion funding for lending scheme. In the OBR's view today, this has reduced UK bank funding costs, lowered interest rates in the real economy, and will add to the level of real GDP. One area where the British economy has done much better than forecast is in creating jobs. Since early 2010, the private sector has created 1.2 million new jobs, 600,000 more than was predicted, and youth unemployment has been falling. Instead of peaking at 8.7%, the OBR now expects unemployment to peak at 8.3%. This at a time when the unemployment rate in Spain is 26%, in France it is almost 11%, and across the whole Eurozone it is almost 12%. Employment, already at a record high, is set to go on rising each year of the forecast, and for every one job less in the public sector, 2 new jobs are expected to be created in the private sector. Britain now has a greater proportion of its people in work than either the Eurozone or the United States of America. Mr. Speaker, more jobs means that the impact of the weaker than forecast GDP on the public finances has been less than some might have expected. There have been 3 developments that have each had a significant one-off impact on the public finances, and in the report today we publish clearly and transparently the impact of all 3. First, there is the transfer of the Royal Mail Pension Fund to the public sector as part of its privatisation. This produces a one-off reduction in the deficit of £28 billion this year, but it adds to the deficit in the years afterwards. Second, the previous government had classified Bradford and Bingley and Northern Rock Asset Management as off-balance sheet. Today it is brought on balance sheet in line with the judgment of the Office for National Statistics. This adds around £70 billion to our national debt and reminds us of the price the country is still paying for the failures of the past. Third, the government has decided, with the agreement of the Bank of England, to transfer excess cash held in the asset purchase facility to the Exchequer. This is sensible cash management. It is in line with the approach of the Bank of Japan and the US Federal Reserve. I welcome the OBR's verdict that this is, in their words, more transparent than the previous approach. I want to make sure its impact on the figures is also completely transparent, so we have today published the forecasts for the public finances with and without the impact of the APF decision. Mr. Speaker, when we came to office, the deficit stood at 11.2%, the highest in our peacetime history. It was forecast to be the largest of any major economy in the world. In the last 2 years, the deficit has fallen by a quarter. Today's figures show that with or without the APF coupons, the deficit is forecast to fall this year as well. And cash borrowing is forecast to fall too. Last year, the deficit was 7.9%. This year, with the APF coupons, it is forecast to be 6.9%, but that excludes the impact of the Royal Mail pension assets. It is falling, and it will continue to fall each and every year to 6.1% next year, 5.2% the year after, 4.2% in 2015-16, then 2.6% before reaching 1.6% in 2017-18. In 2009-10, the country was borrowing £159 billion. This year, we are borrowing £108 billion. That is forecast to fall to £99 billion next year, £88 billion the year after, then £73 billion in 2015-16, and £49 billion and £31 billion in the 2 years after that. These are the central forecasts published by the OPR, with the asset purchase facility cash transfer included. When the transfer is excluded, as we show in the document, the deficit also falls from 7.9% last year to 7.7% this year, then 6.9% next year, and falls in every single year after that. And cash borrowing falls in every year as well. Now, there are those who have been saying that the deficit was going up this year. Indeed, I think I heard it in Prime Minister's questions. But any way you present these figures, this is not what the OBR forecasts show today. They say that the deficit is coming down this year and every year of this Parliament. Yes, the deficit is still far too high for comfort. We cannot relax our efforts to make our economy safe. But Britain is heading in the right direction. The road is hard, but we are making progress. Mr. Speaker, unlike the previous government's golden rule, the regime we have set up means that the Chancellor is no longer judge and jury of their own fiscal rules. And today the OBR have assessed us against those rules. First, the fiscal mandate. This is the commitment that we will balance the cyclically adjusted current budget over the coming 5 years. I can tell the House that the OBR have assessed that we are, in their words, on course to meet our fiscal mandate. In other words, we have a better than 50% chance of eliminating the structural current deficit in 5 years' time, that part of our borrowing that doesn't recover automatically as the economy grows. Now, this is true, again, with or without the transfer of the coupons. So we will meet our fiscal mandate. But the OBR assess in their central forecast that we do not meet the supplementary objective that aims to have debt falling by 2015-16. The point at which debt starts to fall has been delayed by 1 year to 2016-17. And the OBR's central forecast is that net debt will be 74.7% this year, then 76.8% next year, 79% in 2014-15, 79.9% in 2015-16, before falling to 79.2% in 2016-17 and 77.3% in 2017-18. In short, the tougher economic conditions mean that while our deficit is forecast to go on falling, instead of taking 3 years to get our debt falling, it's going to take 4. Now, Mr. Speaker, confronted with this news, some say we should abandon our deficit plan and try to borrow more. They think by borrowing more, we can borrow less. That would risk higher interest rates, more debt interest payments, and a complete loss of Britain's fiscal credibility. We are not taking that road to ruin. Now, then there are those who say that despite all that has happened in the world this year, we should cut even more now to hit the debt target. That would require £17 billion of extra cuts a year, and let me explain why I've decided not to take this course. We've always argued we should let the automatic stabilisers work. We have not argued we should chase down a cyclical or temporary deterioration in the economy, particularly one which our own independent body says is largely driven by problems abroad. That is also the judgment of the IMF, the OECD, and the Governor of the Bank of England. Our aim is to reduce the structural deficit, the permanent hole in our public finances that won't be repaired as the economy recovers. And we are. We've cut the structural deficit by 3 percentage points in the last 2 years, more than any other G7 country, and it is set to go on being cut at a similar rate in the years ahead. This lower deficit is delivered by our public spending plans, and we are going to stick with those plans. Overall, we are not going faster or slower with those plans. The measures I will announce in this autumn statement are fiscally neutral across this Parliament. And there is no net rise in taxes today. Any taxes increased are offset by taxes cut. Mr. Speaker, in last year's autumn statement, we committed the government to maintain the same pace of consolidation for 2 further years beyond the end of the current spending review into 2015 and 2016-17. In this year's autumn statement, we extend the consolidation for 1 further year into 2017-18. The OBR projects that as a result, the share of national income spent by the state will fall from almost 48% of GDP in 2009-10 to 39.5% by 2017-18. The document shows total managed expenditure will continue to fall and will now be 4.6 billion lower in 2017-18 than if it had been held flat in real terms. No decision to cut spending is ever easy, but those who object must explain whether instead they would have higher taxes or higher borrowing or both. I also provide further detail of the consolidation plans for 2015-16, the last year of this Parliament. I said 2 years ago that the correct balance for our fiscal consolidation between spending and tax should be 80-20. I can confirm that by the end of 2015-16, the decisions we announced today mean we will almost exactly deliver on that 80-20 mix. Total spending will fall in that final year of this Parliament at the same rate as through the current spending review. I can confirm today that the overall envelope for total managed expenditure will be set at £745 billion. We start with the working assumption that departmental resource totals will continue on the same trajectory as over the current spending review. The detail of departmental spending plans for 2015-16 will be set at a spending review which will be announced during the first half of next year. What we do today is to take steps now to help deliver those spending plans and to go on reducing the deficit in a way that is fair. This government has shown that it is possible to restore sanity to the public finances while improving the quality of our public services. Crime has fallen. Hospital waiting lists are down. School standards are up. And this is with a civil service that is today smaller than at any time since the Second World War. We are today publishing the reports we commissioned from the pay review bodies on market-facing pay. We commit to implement these reports. This means continuing with national pay arrangements in the NHS and prison service, and we will not make changes to the civil service arrangements either. But the School Teachers Review Body does recommend much greater freedom to individual schools to set pay in line with performance. And my right honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will set out how this will be implemented. Through the efforts of individual government departments and the support of the Chief Secretary and my right honourable friend, the Minister for the Cabinet Office, we have already generated £12 billion of efficiency savings in Whitehall. But we believe there is room to do even more. If all departments reduce their spending on administration in line with the best performing departments like education and communities and local government, then another £1 billion could be saved. If all departments made greater provision of digital services, rationalised their property estates, as some have done, then a further £1 billion could be saved. So today we are reducing departmental resource budgets by 1% next year and 2% in the year after. We will continue to seek efficiency savings in the NHS and in our schools, but that money will be recycled to protect spending in these priority areas. Local government budgets are already being held down next year to deliver the freeze in council tax, so we will not seek the additional 1% saving next year, but we will look for the 2% saving the year after. And while the Ministry of Defence is included in these measures, they will be given flexibility on their multi-year budget to ensure that this will not lead to reductions in military manpower or the core defence equipment programme over the Parliament. A mark of our values as a society is our commitment to the world's poorest. We made a promise as a country that we would spend 0.7% of our gross national income on international development, and I am proud to be part of the first British government in history which will honour that commitment and honour it as promised next year. We will not, however, spend more than 0.7%. So, as we did last year, we will adjust the DFID budget to reflect the latest economic forecasts. In the medium term, these savings across Whitehall will help departments maintain the right trajectory for the years that follow the spending review and help us to pay off the deficit in the future. In the short term, I'm switching these current savings into capital. All the money saved in the first 2 years will be reinvested as part of a £5 billion capital investment in the infrastructure of our country. So despite, Mr. Speaker, the fiscal challenges we face, public investment as a share of GDP will be higher on average in this Parliament than it was under the last Labour government. It is exactly what a government equipping Britain to compete in the modern global economy should be doing. We're committing an extra £1 billion to roads, including 4 major new schemes, to upgrade key sections of the A1, bringing the route from London to Newcastle up to motorway standard, linking the A5 with the M1, dualling the A30 in Cornwall, and upgrading the M25, which will support the biggest port development in Europe. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend for Thurrock for the campaigning she's undertaken to achieve this. We've already set our plans this autumn for a huge investment in rail, and my honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will set out in the new year plans to take High Speed 2 to the North West and to West Yorkshire. I can today confirm a £1 billion loan and a guarantee to extend the Northern Line to Battersea Power Station and support a new development on a similar scale to the Olympic Park. We're confirming funding and reforms to assist the construction of up to 120,000 new homes and delivering on flood defence schemes in more cities. On top of broadband expansion for our countryside and our larger cities, we're funding ultra-fast broadband in 12 smaller cities. These are Brighton and Hove, Cambridge, Coventry, Derby, Oxford, Portsmouth, Salford, York, Newport, Aberdeen, Perth and Derry, Londonderry. In addition to the third of £1 billion announced this autumn for British science, we are today announcing £600 million more for the UK's scientific research infrastructure. And since improving our education system is the best investment in a competitive economy, I am today committing £270 million to fund improvements in further education colleges and £1 billion to expand good schools and build 100 new free schools and academies. Mr. Speaker, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland will get their Barnett share of additional capital spending put at their disposal of their devolved administrations. On top of this £5 billion of new capital spending in infrastructure and support for business, we are ready to provide guarantees for up to £40 billion more. Today I can announce that projects worth £10 billion have already pre-qualified. We're offering £10 billion worth of guarantees for housing too. Our country's pension funds will launch their new independent infrastructure investment platform next year as well. And we have today published full details of the replacement for the discredited PFI. Since we can all see now that the public sector was sharing the risk we will now ensure we also share in the reward. And I commend my honourable friend for Hereford for his work in this area. Taken together, this is a revolution in the sources of finance for upgrading Britain's infrastructure and equipping Britain to win in the global race. Annual average infrastructure investment, which was £29 billion under the last Labour government, is now £33 billion. Now, savings from Whitehall are not enough by themselves to tackle our debts. We need to find other savings, and we need to do it in a way that is fair. Those with the most should contribute the most, and they will. But fairness is also about being fair to the person who leaves home every morning to go out to work and sees their neighbour still asleep living a life on benefits. As well as a tax system where the richest pay their fair share, we have to have a welfare system that is fair to the working people who pay for it. Mr. Speaker, let me start with tax. The vast majority of people, rich or otherwise, pay their taxes and make their contribution. But there are still too many who illegally evade their taxes or use aggressive tax avoidance in order not to pay their fair share. This government has taken more action against these people than any before it. Prosecutions for tax evasion are up 80%. We will collect £7 billion more a year in tax that is due than the last government. We are increasing by around 2,500 the number of tax inspectors going after evaders and avoiders. And next year we will introduce the first ever general anti-abuse rule, something that never happened in 13 years before we came to office. And next year, for the first time in our history, money will be flowing from bank accounts in Switzerland to Britain instead of the other way round. Because of the treaty we've signed, we expect to receive £5 billion over the next 6 years from the undisclosed Swiss bank accounts of UK residents. It is the largest tax evasion settlement in British history. And we're taking further steps today. Hundreds of millions of pounds of tax loopholes are being closed with immediate effect, and we are investigating abusive use of partnerships. HMRC will not have its budget cut over the next 2 years, unlike other departments. Instead, we will spend £77 million more on fighting tax avoidance, and not just for wealthy individuals. We want the most competitive corporate tax system of any major economy in the world, but we expect those corporate taxes to be paid. So today we're confirming that we will put more resources into ensuring multinational companies pay their proper share of taxes, and we are leading the international efforts to prevent artificial transfers of profits to tax havens. With Germany and now France, we have asked the OECD to take this work forward, and we will make it an important priority of our G8 presidency next year. In total, we expect the action we announced today will increase the amount of money collected from tax evasion and avoidance by a further £2 billion a year. Fair and necessary as this is, it is not enough by itself to close the deficit. We need to ask more from the better off. Punitive tax rates do nothing to raise money and simply discourage enterprise and investment in Britain. Other countries on our doorstep are trying that approach and are paying the price, and we're not going to make that mistake. HMRC data reveals that in the first year of the 50% tax rate, tax revenues from the rich fell by £7 billion, and the number of people declaring incomes of over £1 million fell by a half. A tax rate on the rich that raises almost no money is a tax con. We're going to have a top rate of tax that supports enterprise, and we're going to raise more money from the rich. Here is a simple fact. The richest will pay a greater share of income tax revenues in every single year of this coalition government than in any one of the 13 years of the last Labour government. But we need to make sure the deficit reduction remains fair. We need to raise more. Now, Mr. Speaker, we've already raised stamp duty on multi-million-pound homes, and next week published the legislation to stop the richest avoiding stamp duty. But we won't introduce a new tax on property. This would require a revaluation of hundreds of thousands of homes. In my view, it would be intrusive, expensive to levy, raise little, and the temptation for future chancellors to bring ever more homes into its net would be irresistible, so we're not having a new homes tax. We have in this Parliament already reduced the amount of tax relief we give to the very largest pension pots. From 2014-15, I will further reduce the lifetime allowance from £1.5 million to £1.25 million and reduce the annual allowance from £50,000 to £40,000. This will reduce the cost of tax relief to the public purse by an extra £1 billion a year by 2016-17. 98% of people currently approaching retirement have a pension pot worth less than £1.25 million. Indeed, the median pot for such people is just £55,000. 99% of pension savers make annual contributions to their pensions of less than £40,000. The average contribution to a pension is just £6,000 a year. Now, I know these tax measures will not be welcomed by all. Ways to reduce the deficit never are. But we must demonstrate that we're all in this together, and when you look for savings, I think it's fair to look at the tax relief we give to the top 1%. Mr. Speaker, I want to help the great majority of savers. That's why we're introducing a generous new single-tier pension, so that people know it always pays to save. That's why I will uprate next April the overall ISA limit to £11,520. And we will consult on allowing investment in SME equity markets like AIM to be held directly in stocks and shares ISAs to encourage investment in growing businesses. I've also listened to concerns from pensioners about drawdown limits. I am today announcing that the government will raise the capped drawdown limit from 100% to 120%, giving pensioners with these arrangements the option of increasing their incomes. Mr. Speaker, it's also fair to look at the way we uprate benefits and some tax thresholds. The basic state pension has this year gone up by the largest cash amount in its history. Next year, thanks to our triple lock, I confirm it will rise by 2.5%, higher than either earnings or inflation. That takes the level of the basic state pension to £110.15 a week. When it comes to working age welfare, we've already made substantial reforms. £18 billion a year has been cut from the welfare bill. Benefits are being capped for the first time, so families out of work will not get more than the average family gets for being in work. We've increased efforts to fight welfare fraud. Today we announce further measures and cheques to save over £1 billion in the next 4 years by reducing fraud, error and debt in the tax credit system. Next year, my right honourable friend, the Work and Pension Secretary, will introduce the new universal credit so that it always pays to work. And today we set the key parameters, such as the levels of earnings disregards. But we have to acknowledge that over the last 5 years, those on out-of-work benefits have seen their incomes rise twice as fast as those in work. With pay restraint in businesses and government, average earnings have risen by around 10% since 2007. Out-of-work benefits have gone up by around 20%. That's not fair to working people who pay the taxes that fund them. Those working in the public services who have seen their basic pay frozen will now see it rise by an average of 1%. And a similar approach of a 1% rise should apply to those in receipt of benefits. That's fair, and it will ensure that we have a welfare system that Britain can afford. We will support the vulnerable, so carers' benefits and disability benefits, including disability elements of tax credits, will be increased in line with inflation. And we're extending support for mortgage interest for 2 more years. But most working age benefits, including job seekers allowance, employment and support allowance and income support, will be uprated by 1% for the next 3 years. We will also uprate elements of the child tax credit and the working tax credits by 1% for the next 3 years, although previously planned freezes will go ahead. Local housing allowance rates that are a central component of housing benefit will be uprated in line with the existing policy next April, and then we will cap increases at 1% in the 2 years after that. For this measure, 30% of the savings will be used to exempt from the new cap those areas with the highest rent increases. The earning disregard for universal credit will also be uprated by 1% for 2 years from April 2014. Child benefit is currently frozen. It too will now rise by 1% for 2 years from April 2014. Let me be clear, uprating benefits at 1% means people get more cash but less than the rate of inflation. And taken together, we will save £3.7 billion in 2015-16 and deliver permanent savings each and every year from our country's welfare bill. To bring all these decisions for many benefits over many years together, we will introduce into Parliament primary legislation, the Welfare Uprating Bill, and I hope it commands support from both sides of the House. Now, Mr. Speaker, we will apply a similar approach to the uprating of some of our tax thresholds as we have to welfare. The higher rate threshold will be increased by 1% in the tax years 2014-15 and 2015-16. So the income at which people start paying the 40% rate will go up from £41,450 to £41,865 and then to £42,285. I want to be completely clear with people. This is an increase. In fact, it's the first cash increase in the higher rate threshold in this Parliament, but it is not an increase in line with inflation, and so it raises £1 billion of revenue by 2015-16. Again, there are no easy ways to reduce the deficit, but from year to year, no one will pay a penny more in income tax. In the same way, the capital gains tax annual exempt amount will be increased by 1% over the same period, reaching £11,100, and the inheritance tax nil band rate, which has been frozen since 2009 at £325,000, will be increased by 1% in 2015-16 to £329,000. Taken with the welfare uprating decisions, this is a fair approach to paying off Britain's debts. But dealing with those debts is only one part of making Britain fit to compete in the global race. Countries like ours risk being outsmarted, outworked and outcompeted by new emerging economies. We asked Michael Heseltine to report on how to make the government work better for business and enterprise. I think it's fair to say that his answer has captured the imagination of all political parties. We will respond formally in the spring, but here's what we will do now. First, government spending should be aligned with the priorities of the local business community. We will provide new money to support the local enterprise partnerships, and from April 2015, the government will place more of the funding that currently goes to local transport, housing, skills, and getting people back to work into a single pot that LEPs can bid for. Details will be set out in the spending review. Before then, we are putting more money into the Regional Growth Fund, which is helping businesses create 500,000 new jobs. Second, as Lord Heseltine also recommends, we're going to support industries and technologies where Britain has a clear advantage. With my right honourable friend, the Business Secretary's support, we will extend our global lead in aerospace and support the supply chains of advanced manufacturing. We're also taking big steps today to support British companies who export to new emerging markets in Asia, Africa and the Americas. I am increasing the funding for UKTI by over 25% a year so that it can help more firms build the capacity of overseas British chambers and maintain our country's position as the #1 destination in Europe for foreign investment. And we are launching a new £1.5 billion export finance facility to support the purchase of British exports. Third, we are addressing the credit problems for companies. We're creating a new business bank, and today we confirm we're providing it with £1 billion of extra capital, which will lever in private lending to help small and medium-sized firms and bring together existing schemes. And fourth, we are going to cut business taxes still further. Let me tell you how. The temporary doubling of the small business rate relief scheme helps over 500,000 small firms, with 350,000 firms paying no rates at all. The last government were going to end it in September 2011. We've already extended it to next April, and today I extend it by a further year to April 2014. We also today confirm the tax relief for our employee shareholder scheme. The energy bill provides certainty and support for billions of pounds of investment in renewable energy. Today we publish our gas strategy to ensure we make the best use of lower-cost gas power, including new sources of gas under the land. We are consulting on new tax incentives for shale gas and announcing the creation of a single office so that regulation is safe but simple. We don't want British families and businesses to be left behind as gas prices tumble on the other side of the Atlantic. We're going to help our construction industry too. The last government abolished empty property relief. And as excellent work done by my honourable friends, the members for York Outer and Wolverhampton South West and others show, this has blighted development in our towns and cities. The proposal from my colleagues that we create a long grace period before newly completed buildings have to pay empty property rates is a sensible one, and we will introduce it next October. The previous government also planned to increase the small companies' tax rate to 22%, and we have cut it to 20%. But I'd like to help small and medium-sized firms more, and I want to thank my honourable friends for Burnley and for Pendle for their thoughts in this area. Starting on the 1st of January, and for the next 2 years, I am therefore going to increase by tenfold the annual investment allowance in plant and machinery. Instead of £25,000 worth of investment being eligible for 100% relief, £250,000 worth investment will now qualify. This capital allowance will cover the total annual investment undertaken by 99% of all the business in Britain. It's a huge boost to all those who run a business, who aspire to grow and expand and create jobs. Mr. Speaker, I also want Britain to have the most competitive business tax regime of any major economy in the world. I have already cut the main core rate of corporation tax from 28% to 24%, and it's set to fall further to 22%. This has helped British companies and, frankly, left other countries scrambling to keep up. They will have to try harder, for I am today cutting the main rate of corporation tax again by a further 1%. In America, the rate is 40%. In France, it is 33%. In Germany, it is 29%. From April 2014, the corporation tax rate in Britain will stand at 21%. This is the lowest rate of any major Western economy. It is an advert for our country that says, come here, invest here, create jobs here. Britain is open for business. Mr. Speaker, we will not pass the benefit of this reduced rate on to banks, and to ensure that we meet our revenue commitments, the bank levy rate will be increased to 0.130% next year. Making banks contribute more is part of our major reforms to the banking system. We also have to be on the side of those who want to work hard and get on. I know how difficult many families have found the cost of living. In dealing with the deficit, we've had to save money, but whenever we've been able to help, we have. We've helped councils freeze council tax for 2 years running, and we're helping them to freeze it again next year. We put a cap on rail fare rises for the next 2 years, so commuters are not punished for travelling to work. We're forcing energy companies to move families onto the lowest tariffs for their gas and electricity bills. And we've helped motorists with the cost of petrol. We've cancelled the last government's escalator, and I'm moving inflation-only rises to September. Fuel is 10 pence per litre cheaper than it would have been if we'd stuck to Labour's tax plans. And I want to keep it that way, as I know to my colleagues like my honourable friend for Harlow. There is a 3 pence per litre rise planned for this January. Now, some have suggested that we delay that 3 pence rise until April. I disagree. I suggest we cancel it altogether. There will be no 3 pence fuel tax rise this January. That is real help with the cost of living for families as they fill up their cars across the country. And it will help businesses too. And it means that under this government, we'll have had no increases in petrol taxes for nearly 2.5 years. In fact, they've been cut. Mr. Speaker, we've also helped working people by increasing the amount they can earn before paying any income tax. When this coalition government came to office, the personal tax allowance stood at just £6,475. Next April, it is set to rise to £9,205. 24 million taxpayers have seen their income tax cut. 2 million of the lowest paid have been taken out of tax altogether. And because of the difficult decisions we've taken today, we can go even further. From next April, the personal allowance will rise by a further £235. That means a total increase next year of £1,335, the highest cash increase ever. People will be able to earn £9,440 before paying any income tax at all. This is a direct boost to the incomes of people working hard to provide for their families. It's £47 extra in cash next year. In total, a £267 cash increase next year. People working full-time on the minimum wage will have seen their income tax bill cut in half. And we are within touching distance of the £10,000 personal allowance. And at this time, I propose to extend the benefits of this further increase to higher rate taxpayers. That decision will stand alongside the decision I've had to take on uprating, meaning that in real terms, a typical higher rate taxpayer will be better off next year and no worse off in total by the year after. Mr. Speaker, today we've helped working people, but I do not want to distract from the tough economic situation we face in the world. The public know there are no miracle cures, just the hard work of dealing with our deficit and ensuring Britain wins the global race. That work is underway. The deficit is down. Borrowing is down. Jobs are being created. It is a hard road, but we are making progress. And everything we do, we are helping those who want to work hard and get on. Thank you.